Welcome back to another episode of the HR Leaders Podcast, the show where we explore the future of work with industry experts and HR executives in the world's leading global brands. Today, we're super excited about this episode of a special guest, a man who needs no introduction. I'm joined by Josh Bersin, Global Industry Analyst and Dean at the Josh Bersin Academy. Welcome to the show, Josh. How are you?
Thank you, Chris. I'm good. It's nice. The sun's out. It's not too cold out. And, life's getting a little bit better every day.
You're not in Texas, are you?
No, I'm in California.
Okay.
I just don't want to go back to fires again. Last year it was the fires. So we have our own issues.
For those few people listening that aren't aware of your work, give everyone just a quick introduction and then we'll kind of jump into the conversation.
Yeah, I'm an industry analyst at heart. Most of what I do is research and consulting with lots of companies, mostly bigger companies, and study what's going on in the world of work and HR and learning and technology. And then we have an academy of professional development for HR professionals and HR teams. And then this last couple of years, I spent a lot of time on skills and the skills of HR and the capabilities that we need in the profession and how that's shaping up. So, and then of course, last year was all about the pandemic, and it still is. So we have a big group of companies that have been coming together every week to talk about what we call the big reset, which is, kind of the reset of everything. So that's what I've been doing for the last many years.
Yeah, and for those that are listening, if you aren't already aware of the Bersin Academy, make sure you go over and check it out as well. You've done some incredible work throughout this whole pandemic as well, and I know so many leaders that I speak to every day always recommend it and say it's such a great community of people and learning resource for them. So the link's already in the description if anyone who isn't aware of that. Kind of looking back over the last year, it's been a bit of a whirlwind, of course, and on all fronts. What have been some of your observations looking back over the last year behind us?
Well, there's probably two or three things that I walk away with. One is, of course, that human beings we're in an economy going forward and through the last few years where virtually every job is a service job. So the human skills, the emotional skills, the resilience, the well-being, the sense of safety are central to success. And what we learned last year is that human beings are very resilient animals. We get threatened by virus, family issues, fires in my neighborhood, power outages, uncertainty in the political environment, social unrest, racial unrest. Just about everything that could upset people last year happened, including a lot of people got sick. But the economy turns around and people kind of come to grips with it and they transform themselves. And I think what companies learned last year is that if you take care of people in a meaningful way, in a business-oriented way, they will respond. They will help your company succeed. And that's really what HR is all about, is not just administering new programs and buying tools and content and stuff. It's making sure the company is building the people practices that allow people to succeed, because 99% of workers, employees, managers want to succeed. They want to have a great job. They want to do a great job for the company. And so we learned that in a big way last year. Mm-hmm. And then the other theme that comes up in all of the conversations I have is what we're now calling human-centered leadership, which is leading with the center of empathy and thinking about the people first before the business. I'm not saying the business isn't important, and the numbers and the technology and the innovation and the competition and the market, but there's kind of a maybe re-education of leadership that empathy and listening are the most important things of all. Maybe that's not new, but it certainly was clear last year.
Mm-hmm. I think that certainly shone through, didn't it, as one of the silver linings of last year. I even said for my small team here, I feel like I've gotten to know them on a whole different level. Than even though I've known some of them for 10, 15 years, we kind of bonded over the experience as well, because literally no one was immune in every sense of the word.
There's a funny piece of data that I was just looking at last week. I think it was Glint, that employee satisfaction with their jobs is at an all-time high, which is bizarre because stress and worry and social and mental illness and everything else are at an all-time high also. And I think that's because people realize that in a time of stress, if the company takes care of them and they like the people they're working with, it's a pretty nice thing to have in your life. And that's another reminder of what HR can be doing, in the next year or so.
You think as well that it's going to change? We everyone will keep saying, are we ever going to go back to the way we worked before? Like, there's a question that keeps popping up. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't. I'm old enough that I don't think about going back to anything. I mean, I think you learn. You learn from history. I mean, what I do is I've learned a lot about this as an analyst. I mean, I spend a lot of time on history. I try to figure out how things like this went in the past. And then, we kind of try to plot what's going to happen next. We're not going to go back to the world we were in 2019. I mean, I remember I live in San Francisco. We had traffic. I was getting up at 4 a.m. to go to the San Francisco airport, flying all over the world, never getting enough sleep. People were working in crowded offices with 1 inch away from each other, putting headphones on because they couldn't stand the noise coming from the person sitting next to them. You remember this. 3.5% unemployment rate, impossible to hire people. We're not going back to that. We're going back to something, more of a hybrid work experience. And, look at this digital technology. The tool, I do a lot on VR, for example, for the training industry, and I have a VR headset. I mean, this technology is absolutely earth-shattering what it's going to do to our lives. And the fact that we use Zoom and video now so regularly, that's not going to go away. So, so the future is going to be a little different, and it'll be more hybrid. We won't be home full time, and we'll figure out how to mix human interaction face-to-face with online digital stuff. And I just think we're going to have to learn as we go. We're not going back to the way things were.
No, certainly not. Kirsten had a good question on LinkedIn, and you can see it on the screen now. Said, how does employee satisfaction correlate to engagement and productivity? Are you seeing that correlation?
Yeah. So, Kirsten, thank you for asking that, because this is a big topic I like to talk about. I think if you look at employee engagement in the history of it, it was an IO psychology domain of standing at the side, looking at work and saying, what are the dials we can tune that might make people happier? And in exchange for that, we will get higher productivity. But actually, I think the opposite is true. Productivity creates engagement. If you focus on productivity and making work easier and making sure you have people in the right jobs and they're well trained and they're coached and they're supported, they will be happier. So the relationship is the reverse. Now, I know a lot of books have been written by psychologists on all the IO psychology and industrial engineering around work, and that's all true. But I think right now, the number one thing that people want is they want to be more productive, and they want their employer to stop telling them to do everything. There's a lot of data that shows that one of the biggest challenges people have right now is they're too busy. They have too many meetings, too many Zoom calls, too many emails, and that's a productivity issue that we have to help managers deal with by simplifying the amount of work, reducing the number of things people do and telling people that's not important. I don't want you to focus on that. We don't need to do that right now. Let's work over here. That makes people more engaged. And the book that I think nailed that was The Progress Principle, which is a couple of years old. Maybe it's more than that. But it's a book by Teresa Amabile. And she looked at the job logs of people in different jobs and what made them happy about their jobs when they came home from work. And the number one theme of all of the job logs and thousands of people was, I got something done today. I did something for somebody else. I finished a project. I contributed to the team, and that made me feel good. So I think that's the relationship.
Quite a few people in the chat are kind of asking questions around sort of this new war for talent that we keep hearing. And I know the number of jobs is almost as high as it was 12 months ago now. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
It's higher. I mean, according to the data I have, it's 15% higher. There's 15% more jobs now than there were a year ago, which is just staggering when you look at the unemployment rate. So, they're different. We have more truck drivers. We have more people in logistics. We have more people in customer service. We have more salespeople. We have more people in tech. There aren't people on cruise lines. There aren't people in airports. There's just the number of jobs is up, but they're different jobs. Yeah, I think we're going into another very, very competitive war for talent. It's not going to be a war for the data scientists and the machine learning engineers and the cybersecurity people. That's still going on. That never went away. But it's going to be a war for hands-on labor, drivers, labor workers. Apparently, blue-collar workers are in high demand. I mean, from what I've been reading, it's hard to find people who, can do the sort of physical work that we need to do. And then, of course, managers, salespeople, team leaders, project leaders are in huge demand. And I think this time in this economic cycle, we have even better AI. So for those of you in HR who are in the recruiting and talent acquisition side, you got to gear up. You've got to make sure you've got, really modern recruiting tools. Inclusive recruiting is going to be critical because, if you have bias in your recruiting channel, you're leaving out a whole bunch of job candidates in a lot of cities and countries that are, going to be needed. And then you're going to have to look at things like pay and employment brand. I mean, you've seen, how Uber is now being forced to add benefits in the UK, and in California, we had a similar law. So I think we're going to be back to where we were maybe 3 or 4 years ago of really thinking about what can we do to attract the greatest people, find them, and pay them appropriately, and develop them. And by the way, the other thing that's very, very different this time is internal mobility is now a mainline part of HR. You can buy a talent marketplace tool, or you can do it yourself. There are a lot of people inside the company that would like that new job also. And if you take some time and open up that internal communication and mobility process, you're going to find your company's even performing at a higher rate. So that to me is the new war for talent that we're going to be into.
We also have the added element now that people can work from anywhere. So they're now looking at different options. I'm seeing a lot of friends of mine that were expats are now moving back to the UK.
Yeah.
So that they don't have to actually work in those regions. How do you think that's going to play out?
Well, it's not as radical as people thought. I mean, there were a lot of companies that were shocked that they could employ people at home. Banks and insurance companies and very traditional regulated companies were not sure if it was going to work, and then they learned last year it worked out fine. So I think most companies are going to have hybrid hiring policies where most jobs, not every job, but a lot of jobs will be remote enabled. And then what I've learned about the remote work is in a normal economy, post-pandemic, people still have to get together. You still have to physically meet every quarter, every month, get some FaceTime together, have some social interactions with each other. So we'll go back to that. But I don't think everybody's going to come back to offices. And, the other thing that's a big theme now, because of global warming and all of the issues with the energy systems, is reducing the commute time, creating satellite offices so people can work closer to home without working at home. I think WeWork kind of opened up that concept to people. So I think companies are very, and I know out here in the Bay Area, this is true. They're building satellite locations so you don't have to drive down to Sunnyvale and spend 2 hours in the car to go to headquarters to do your job, because that's 2 hours each way. You're exhausted, you burn a lot of fuel, and you're not very productive. So I think those are realities. And then there's the issue of how do you pay people when they're in remote locations. And I think what most companies are finding is, you have to pay people what they're worth. And if they happen to live in Montana, that doesn't mean you can't pay them you shouldn't pay them.
That's a really big issue. I'm seeing a lot of CHROs I speak to battle with, and many of them have actually taken the other stance of that is the wage rate based on that location. So that's what we're going to pay you. And it's not going down well, as you can imagine.
Well, I do. We have remote people in our company, and I know people in the San Francisco Bay Area are very highly paid because I know how expensive it is to work here. And, we have employees. We actually hire a lot of people in non-California cities because we just find they're just as good and we can work remotely with them, and they don't need to make as much money, and their expectations are different. So it's just a matter of being market driven.
Yeah. What about from a cultural perspective? You mentioned, and a few people have asked this actually. I can bring up a comment from Zogan right now who said, how do we build a better culture when people are socially apart? That's a big concern and challenge for many organizations.
Well, this is a big topic, and I guarantee you your HR people are working on this.
Yeah.
You know, there's a million little things, communications and listening and friendship and joy and entertainment and good spirit and flexibility and forgiveness, and all those human values are really important right now, and they really contribute to culture in a time of stress, which we're all in. And then I think it's important to formalize your culture and talk about it. Have conversations with the senior leaders about culture and see if you're all on the same page. You know, cultures, I mean, you can observe, when I come into a company, I observe the culture from the outside, and I always get a very quick assessment of what it's really like there. But when you're in it, you don't notice it. It's like the fish in the fish tank doesn't notice the water they're in. So the way to deal with that is to explicitly talk about it and have a debate or a discussion. We just finished a project with a tech company where we interviewed, I don't know, 30 or 40 work teams about culture, and came back with some very, very common themes that they all said. And we showed that information to the CEO, and he goes, "You guys nailed it. You know, I haven't been able to put this into words, but we have these issues."
Yeah.
And that's giving them the opportunity to have the conversation about the culture. If they didn't explicitly want to work on it and they just sort of ignored it, they wouldn't know where the culture maybe had some issues. So those are all really important projects to be doing right now.
One of the big things of our last summit, for example, that we ran actually, was around employee experience. And obviously it's just dramatically changed given the current landscape and, you know, a post-COVID workplace. It's more sort of collaboration spaces, etc. What are you seeing and hearing from your clients and the research?
Okay, so you guys have probably read a lot of the articles I wrote on this. I wrote a big
Yes,
article
I have.
on Microsoft. Okay, so EX, let me take a minute or two and just talk about this. The EX word came out of, you know, it probably started in 2016. It was the idea of applying design thinking to HR. So let's think about HR as a bunch of experiences, not a bunch of programs. And that was a paradigm shift in itself. And that opened up the door to iterative design and empathy and more creative solutions. But since then, it's blown up. And now EX refers to virtually everything that happens at work that impacts your productivity, your engagement, your retention, your well-being. And most companies have cross-functional teams for employee experience that include IT, HR, safety, facilities. I mean, right now, you know, if the company says you got to be in the office on Tuesday, and the employee says, "Well, I don't feel safe," that's an employee experience issue. If my computer's broken, that's an employee experience issue. If I'm underpaid, that's an employee experience issue. If I feel like I'm being harassed, that's an employee. So now it's blown out way beyond this little design thinking idea into this big topic of all these, you know, work issues. And so it's become an industry in a sense of solutions and tools and consulting. And I think that's a healthy thing, because as I talked about in the session that I put together for the Microsoft announcement, employee experience is sort of like what, you know, ERP was in the 1970s, the 1980s. We now realize we've got to stitch together all these little employee programs that we've got into some integrated strategy, because we can't keep throwing things at people and say, "Oh, look, here's another program on this. Oh, here's something for that. Oh, you have this problem, go here." Nobody knows where all that stuff is, and they probably won't use it. So it's a big area. We're doing a massive project on this, and we'll be publishing it in Q2. And we've already, you know, we've looked at like 70 or 80 parts of the employee experience and which ones are the weakest and which ones are the strongest. And a lot of the things that we're finding are problems are not just the tech, which is a big part of it, but that's people are not being given clarity of their roles, clarity of their responsibilities. They're being given too many things to do. They're not being given enough time and resources for development and self-improvement. So I think what we're going to find in our research is that some of the core ideas of culture in HR are still the center of employee experience. And then the tech part of it's huge. I mean, every tech vendor wants to be in this space. So we can talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. You made a great point, though. I think before we jump, everyone thinks that technology is like the silver bullet. We jump straight to technology, but we've got a lot of other work that we can be doing beforehand before we want to introduce technology into the mix. And I see that many of the HR leaders I speak to every day are kind of overwhelmed with so many different technologies.
Well, the problem with tech, I'll tell you something funny. I just got a research report on this morning. The problem with tech is there's so much good tech, there's too much. So I looked at a big report by Okta, which is an identity management system. The average big company has 140 apps for employees. 140.
Wow.
I mean, there's the email system, there's the project management system, there's the time and attendance system, there's the expense recognition system, there's the this, the that. So there is an issue of making that stuff all come together. And it's very, very expensive to build a custom employee portal. It's a never-ending, massive $100 million plus project in a big company. You've got to point people to all the right service centers inside the company to support them on various issues. So there is a big re-engineering going on in the tech part of employee experience. And that's why the Microsoft announcement and ServiceNow and some of the other vendors are making a fortune on building an integrated layer that protects people from the complexity. And that's an early market. So there will be a lot of shakeout in that, and there'll be a lot of big vendors that'll put a lot of interesting things together there.
Well, talking of technology, one of the big kind of booms that's come out of this, and it really exploded in 2020, is being around well-being. I think that's one of the silver linings actually of everything is that companies are now paying more attention to the well-being. But again, at the same time, now I think I looked at your website. I think it's $45 billion corporate well-being marketplace now that exploded in 2020. There are now hundreds of apps, fitness apps, mindfulness apps, mental health and well-being apps, etc.
Right.
And it's great because obviously employees and managers have become more focused on empathy, leading with empathy and supporting employees. But at the same time, it just seems that companies are just throwing apps at people, hoping they're going to solve.
Well, and that doesn't work. I mean, we've studied this now for a while. All of these markets go like this. They start with a great idea, and well-being was a great idea that started, in the compensation and benefits department, and it was really a recruiting tool for a while. I remember when Google offered egg harvesting and yoga classes, and everybody said, "Oh, we have to do that too. If we want to get engineers to come work for us." So everybody started piling on all these benefits, and companies now are realizing that a high amount of that doesn't get used or only gets used by a small number of people. So you have to build a program around it, and that program can't be in the benefits department. It has to be, kind of in the core employee experience or, leadership part of the company. And what most companies are doing now is they're building a framework for well-being that looks at mental and emotional well-being, physical well-being and safety, financial well-being, because if people are underpaid, they're coming to work worried. And then social and cultural well-being, which includes social responsibility and citizenship. And if you build a framework like that, you can think about, well, let's focus our energies on those 4 or 5 areas and make sure that every employee has access to an appropriate amount of solutions in those areas. And that gives us a language for talking about well-being with leaders, because well-being isn't just a problem for the benefits department, it's a problem for leaders. If leaders are pushing people too hard,
on themselves too hard.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so it gets back to what I talked about earlier, the idea of human-centered leadership. So that's where well-being's been growing up. It's been growing up, as I put it, it grew up out of the benefits department and kind of landed in the boardroom. And so HR can really take the lead on this, and it's really a very important change in the way we work. And it'll be with us past the pandemic. It'll continue.
Yeah, but I'm sure you've seen it as well, though. But over the last kind of year, you've seen the global head of well-being roles being created.
There's chief health officers in companies now. Yeah. So
Do you think that's necessarily a good thing? Because now it says, okay, now we have a department for that, as opposed to it being we should all be, as leaders throughout the whole organization, this is an issue, not just let's put a function together that deals with that.
well, it's the same idea as the chief digital officer. You know, right now nobody needs a chief digital officer because everybody's doing everything digital. But for a while we needed that to inject change. So I understand why it's happening. If you're a global retailer or a pharmaceutical company or a any kind of a company, and you need a big enterprise-wide focus on health and safety, and you don't have a chief safety officer, like oil companies and manufacturer companies have had that for years.
Yeah.
That's a good way to get it started. And then, 2 or 3 years from now, that person will probably, go away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was getting at. It seems that seems to be a trend with those.
It's interesting, going back to this idea of history. So, because I talk to so many companies, you go to Chevron, you go to Shell, you go to Exxon, you talk about Dow Chemical. There are companies that have been talking about employee safety and health for a long time. This isn't a new idea, but has been mostly, high risk, dangerous work situations where this has happened. Now we're all in high risk, dangerous work situations. So I think there's a lot of learning from those companies that, other white collar companies can now adopt.
Mm-hmm. I know some of the work that you're really passionate about, and I know, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you have a course coming up on this, is around evaluating equity.
Mm-hmm.
About the real story of D&I. Tell us more about that, because it's super important.
Big project. We just launched it all this week. Well, I don't have to explain how big the issue is of Black Lives Matter and racial justice and economic equality and gender equality. I mean, it's a center of the Biden administration now. And when you look at the data on, the number of Black CEOs and the progression of income equality, it's really terrible. It's a problem in the United States that is completely unsolved. We've inched forward, but I think about my own career. I entered the workforce in 1978 when there was affirmative action, and the workplace was much more diverse then than it is now. I mean, I worked at a company that was very diverse, probably was forced to be diverse, but it was really good. And now that company is less diverse. So we've got to go sort of think about, why is that? It isn't a lack of, unconscious bias training or diversity and inclusion compliance programs. I mean, I just took a course that I have to take. That's not the problem. The problem is the business defining itself as an equitable, inclusive business. And as a business strategy, then the people strategy, the recruiting strategy, the pay strategy, the reward strategy, the promotion strategy will be equitable in addition. So what we've found in this research, and this is covered in the course with lots of interesting stories, is that the companies that are highly diverse, highly inclusive, first of all, they're high performing companies because they're great companies to work at. Everybody loves working there and they really feel included, and they can tap into a vastly bigger talent pool in companies that are not diverse. But they define it as a business strategy, not an HR strategy. So they don't just hire a head of DEI and give this person a job in HR and say, hey, go build a DEI program. That doesn't do it. In some cases, that even creates problems where people are forced to go to training and then they don't feel comfortable about the training and they're not sure why they're going. So I'll give you just one quick story on this. So one of the companies we interviewed is a telecommunications company, very focused on income inequality issues and diversity. And one of the operations managers said, when we locate cell phone towers on a building, we pretty much make that person rich, because the person that owns that building is going to get a $5,000 to $10,000 a month lease from us. And, it's going to be a good deal. All they have to do is give us a little real estate on the top of their building. Do we have a program to look for cities, locations, and owners of those buildings that are underemployed or low-income people? Maybe we should be putting our cell phone towers in places where we can redistribute income to people that need it. And it was like a light bulb goes off. Of course, that's such an obvious thing to do. We can put it on here or across the street. We can look. so, that's, Target, for example, has a business strategy to bring joy to, I think it's something like bring joy to all families in their everyday life, all highlighted. So they put stores in locations that are, diverse and inclusive. They sell products that are all different prices. Their entire sort of business strategies around being an inclusive and diverse and equitable company. And of course, they have a great diversity and inclusion program and a very diverse workforce. That's what we learned is you can't just throw this into HR and do a bunch of reporting and put together an annual DEI report and assume it's going to get that much better.
Mm-hmm.
You have to think about it as a business strategy. And anyway, so we've got a whole course on that and a big research report on it. And I encourage people to go through there, and I think you'll learn a lot from it.
Amazing. We'll link that in the comments section for anyone who's interested as well. Another thing I've seen a big shift in and a lot of conversations around, and I think this is the way you stated it in some of your research, is around the L&D area in terms of, I think you mentioned saying that the real data engine of learning is not LMS or LXP, it's learning record store. Could you share a bit more about that with everyone? Because I think it's really important.
Chris, you really do a lot of digging around in my stuff.
It's my job.
Okay, so learning, let's take a minute on this because it's a big problem. So the learning industry is a gigantic, complicated, messy place. There's courses and there's reading materials and there's assignments and there's assessments and there's virtual reality and there's all these different ways to learn. And every company does a whole sort of smattering of different methods. And then they want to know, kind of what are we getting out of this? What's working, what's not working, what are people consuming? And it turns out, just like in your consumer business or your customer business, the thing that people like is the thing they're buying a lot of. So what you find is actually the most successful programs are the ones that have very high utilization. They're highly recommended to others, and the activity level is high. If somebody's not using it, not consuming it, not recommending it, it's probably not very good. So where is that data? Do you have access to that data? Well, it's probably not in the LMS. The LMS may have some of it, but and then what part of the course is great and what part of the course is bad? Well, that data is sitting around too. You go to LinkedIn Learning, for example, which has, hundreds of thousands of hours of training. People tell me it's great, but we don't need all that. There's just there's a small amount of training that people really want. They don't want to go through hours at a time of courses. Well, all of that data has got to be available. So similar to what goes on in the advertising industry, we need a system that shows us where's the action, where are people clicking? And that's what a learning record store is. So the learning record store, which is a geeky little tool that most people don't even know about, is an emerging technology area in learning that gives you a place to really understand where the activity is high and where the activity is low, and where you're probably getting high ROI and where you're probably getting low ROI. So that's what the learning record store is. It's a relatively small market. There's half a dozen vendors. We're working on a big paper, actually. It's really interesting. We've interviewed about 15 companies on how they're using the LRS, and we'll be producing that in the next maybe a month. And it's really a cool technology. It's new, and it's one more disruptive advancement in L&D that I think is going to be really useful to people in understanding how to, get more return on all of these training investments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad I brought that up now. I think it's really important for everyone as well. And we're also starting to see a lot of the big players get involved in this. Are you seeing that as well?
Oh, the learning industry is hot. When I got into it in 2001 when online learning was starting, and it was kind of this geeky, niche thing. Now it's massive. I mean, Microsoft and LinkedIn and Cornerstone and virtually every major corporation, IBM wants to be in it, either selling content, selling technology, selling skills. And it's a red ocean of many companies, and most corporations buy too much stuff. I mean, unfortunately, because it's so exciting and interesting, You end up finding out that in most big companies, they've got, 2 or 3 times too many courses that people aren't taking. They've got, 10 technologies that do the same thing as each other, and it needs to be rationalized. So I think what happens in bigger companies is every maybe 2 to 3 years, you need to go through an audit. We call it a forensic audit of where you're spending your money on L&D, and just make sure you're not, kind of a little bit ahead of yourself and the people really are consuming it. The other thing that happens in learning that I've always found interesting is it's one of the most innovative areas of technology. Every technology that comes out gets used for learning first. Like virtual reality is a good example. I don't know how many of you have ever put on VR glasses, but I guarantee you the first time you put on VR, it's going to blow your mind. You're going to just go, whoa, where have I been? Well, training people have been doing this for 5 years. And so they started pioneering and innovating with this long before Oculus and, Facebook got interested in it. So it's a very creative part of HR, and there's, micro learning and AI driven learning and, learning in the flow of work, which is the big theme of where it's going. It's very interesting. So you kind of have to invest in the R&D part of it as a bigger company. If you're a small company, you kind of wait until some of these things are proven. And, to me, it's always fascinating because, I think it's one of the most essential parts of life is human beings are learning animals. I mean, we learn from the minute we're born. So if the company can give us a reasonably good learning experience at work, it's going to kind of meet our human needs as individuals, and we'll be better at our jobs, and we'll be better with customers. So it's a very important part of HR, and it's never going to go away, and it's always going to be like this.
Yeah. You think there's more emphasis on it now because people are at home? And then
there's more consumption. There's the learning vendors and the learning departments we talk to tell me that the consumption is up 30 to 50% because people have time at home. They're working on weekends or nights. They're on their computers so they can get access to content in a little bit easier way. Yes, there's been a massive growth cycle in all aspects of learning.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing. I spoke to one of the vendors we work with, and they said they had a 40% increase in traffic, and they had to quickly get, buy more server space on their end from AWS. And they were like, whoa, we was not prepared for this as well. So there's a real hunger for people. And you're right, that those hours perhaps they may spend traveling. They've got time to extra 2 hours, 3 hours a day. And
well, there's also there's conversational micro learning now where you can chat to your phone and it'll do something through chat. I mean, there's all little tiny videos. I mean, Quibi didn't work out, but it's been used in training just fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In terms of overall HR transformation, we've seen HR functions themselves being completely disrupted and change and shift. And there's a lot of work for them to do now this year, and taking a lot of the lessons from last year to have real laser focus on employee experiences, one of those followed by many others that we discussed. What do you think the biggest challenge is going to be for those functions and organizations to shift?
Well, this is my favorite topic of all, because this is what I've been spending my career on the last 2 or 3 years. I think what's happened in HR is HR has become a center of innovation. Almost everything that companies want to do is a unique, creative process to build a program or a solution for our company that's best for our company. And at the same time we're doing that, we have to have ever better service delivery, self-service, and digital HR solutions, so we don't have to call somebody in the HR department and say, how do I take my vacation again? Where's the form I have to fill out to get my 401k balance changed? So we've got this digital transformation of the employee experience and going from what we call personal to personalized. Personal is I call the HR department. Personalized is I don't have to call the HR department because it's so easy. I just do it myself. And upskilling and reskilling HR people to be more consultants. And so we look at it as it's a transformation project because, most companies have a lot of HR people and some of them are in very tactical roles. There's recruiters, there's sourcers, there's administrators, there's people running reports and doing compensation and stuff. And so there's a transformation needed to automate as much of that as possible, build a self-service experience that's productive, and then build what we call full stack HR professionals. And we call them full stack along the lines of full stack engineers. And in the engineering domain, a full stack engineer means you know the hardware, you know the operating system, you know the application, you know the middleware, you know the front end, you know the mobile. You're able to work across the whole stack, and that's a very highly paid job, and it takes years to be that. Well, that's what HR people need to be. For example, it turns out when we look at the capabilities of HR, the lowest rated capability is diversity and inclusion. Most HR people are intimidated by the topic. They know a little bit about it, but they're a little afraid to get into it too much because they're afraid they'll do something wrong. Well, you can't really do anything in HR without understanding those issues. Ditto compensation, recruiting, leadership, on
everything. Yeah.
So I think we're moving to a world where the profession is significantly upgrading itself. HR people clearly have a seat at the table now. And so the transformation has to be what I call a transformation from the inside out, not just transforming the department, but transforming the people in the department. And that was really what led me to start our academy, was to try to help companies do that.
It seems like a very different set of skills, though, than the traditional HR skills.
Yeah, it's been coming though. I mean, I think if you went into HR because you liked filling out forms for people, you probably weren't thinking about it right. Yeah. It is a highly demanding, strategic, difficult role. The guy from The Office, I forgot his name, the HR guy. That's not what it is. I'm not saying there aren't a lot of people that are stuck in jobs like that, but when you're a great HR professional, and I've learned this in my career, I mean, I'm just the greatest admirer of the profession going, and I didn't get trained in HR either. You are a change agent, you're a strategist, you're a coach, you're a developer of people, you're an assessor of people, you understand organizational dynamics and culture, you understand how the business is impacted by the people issues, you understand training and skills. These are really interesting, complex problems. So, if there's anything I could do for HR people is motivate you to take this profession seriously, because it's a really, really deep and important profession in business. And these articles that used to come out all the time, like, let's get rid of the HR department, we don't need it. That's just baloney. Yeah. I mean, this is a complicated area. And when it's done well, the company, absolutely outperforms its peers.
Now more than ever, the business is looking towards the HR department saying, what do we do?
Right.
And
and Chris, one thing I'd like to say to people, and I know this is a little bit of a glib comment, but virtually every business problem that you run into, sales productivity, product delay, quality, customer retention, is a people problem. It just needs to be thought about that way. And that's what HR people are designed to do, is come in and say, you know what, I think I see why this is happening. If we change this, that is more likely to be a better outcome. That's a very strategic consultative role.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned all of those things, plus you also talk about in your work how they, in addition to that, they have to be a competent economist, politician.
Yeah, I mean, I think, this is a little bit more advanced, but for me, listen, think about it this way. We are involved in the people side of business. So everything around us, the economy, is it an up cycle or a low cycle, down cycle? The political culture, what are people worried about at home and bringing to work with them? The regulatory environment, the technology environment. We have to understand how technology is changing, because it's changing the way we do our jobs. The industry we live in and work in, and how's the industry changing? You get to be a really serious business person. If you want to be a really full stack HR person, you should probably have an MBA or equivalent. You should be reading the Wall Street Journal, paying attention. I mean, I read the Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, the New York Times, The Economist, and I'm reading about HR stuff all the time. I mean, I'm seeing people issues in all of the business journals, and I listen to tech podcasts and do all sorts of crazy stuff. So, if you want to really lean into this profession, you can kind of look at almost everything in society and how it impacts people and bring it to work, and you'll find yourself an even better HR professional.
I completely agree with you. It's a lot to take on the role right now.
Oh, but it takes time. You can't do it all in 1 year.
Yeah.
But that's why it's kind of a great profession.
Well, look, before I let you go, I just want to ask a couple of questions because I've been following your work for a long time. What is it? How do you continue to just disrupt Josh Bersin? Because
the people around me, I think maybe you can ask people around me. I think my nature is, there's two sides to me. One is I'm a scientist. My dad was a physicist. So I really like data and learning and connecting the dots. My forte is, I think, making sense of complexity. And the second is I'm an entrepreneur. I've always been my father was an entrepreneur. My mother's an entrepreneur. I sort of grew up in a world where, big companies are great, and I've worked for quite a few big companies, but I don't mind rolling up my sleeves and doing things, and that's maybe my engineering background. So I'm always trying to reinvent what I'm doing on behalf of our customers, and I know, and I feel this kind of this obligation and this constant energy to do it better and better and better, because I know how badly people need it. So I'm very mission driven in what I do. And I've found it to be a wonderful career for me. I love my work every day. I probably work too many hours, but I have a supportive family, and so far it's worked out. And I think that's, I don't want to work for a big company. I would not be a good CHRO. I would never succeed in a job like that. But I think what I've found, in this domain as an analyst and an educator and a consultant, that this is a good place for me, and that's disruptive enough.
Yeah, well, we're all happy that you're there.
And that you chose this direction. I really appreciate that.
And, thank you so much for all of your work. Thank you for taking the time to come and join us and share your experience with everyone. It means a lot. For everyone listening, sorry we couldn't get through all of the questions in the chat. I think we'd have been here a lot longer if we having to do that. But make sure you go over to the Bersin Academy. The link's in the description. Check out Josh's work if you're not already aware of it. Apart from that, enjoy the rest of your day, Josh, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you very much.